Next curve.
Hey everybody, welcome to this Next Curve Rethink podcast episode where we break down the latest tech and industry events and incidents. We break them down into the insights that matter, and I'm Leonard Lee, executive analyst at Next Curve, joined by my buddy, a good friend of mine, very, very smart dude, Roy Chua of AvidThink, to talk about probably like the biggest news headline or tech or cybersecurity headline to cross any desk, the CrowdStrike quote unquote outage, and the latest developments and the new stuff in the world of network APIs. Roy's going to give us his takes and his thoughts on and experiences, I think, right? From TM Forums, DTW, Ignite 2024. And we will then talk about Nokia's move to acquire Infinera. That was also a big deal.
Yeah, that's a decent deal.
But you and I haven't caught up in a long time. It's great to have you on again. But before we start, remember to like, share, and comment on this episode and subscribe to the ReThink podcast here on YouTube and on Buzzsprout to take us on the road and on your jog on your favorite podcast platform. And also make sure to check out Roy, my friend Roy here, and AvidThink at www.avidthink.com. And yes, we do take crypto, so crypto is welcome.
We should.
We should have like a little donation button. But hey, how's it going? We haven't spoken to each other. We haven't chatted on a very long time. I know that we've both been really busy, right? And so it's nice
both traveling. I know you've been traveling more recently than I have. So yeah.
Well, it's funny. I've been using my Vision Pro so much lately. You know what I've been doing? What I just tried to do? I tried to move a window on my computer by pinching. Isn't that like friggin' hilarious?
Keep going like that and like
I was like doing this going, why is this window not moving? I can't believe I caught myself doing that.
But you know what? That's perfectly normal, right? If you're using the iPad, I was like touching my screen, my Mac, and I'm like, right? It's the same thing, right?
There you go. Yeah. Yes. So
it has been well.
And it's good to see you.
Likewise.
So, let's dig into this CrowdStrike, man. I just wanted to say, it's just boggles my mind how the media, especially the business, outlets have. There's so many bad articles about this, misconceptions, and then also the way it's being portrayed to the government, even with the regulators talking about how this is like a Microsoft thing. I mean, it's just the level of misinformation and misdirection is astounding. Okay. And so I guess I'm kind of opening my kimono on this topic really early here, but let's, what do you think? What are your first impressions here? And then maybe we'll talk about what actually happened, because this happened on, I think,
Friday early morning.
Friday early morning last week.
That's correct.
And thank God I wasn't traveling, because I would really upset.
That would have been messed up.
Yeah. But tell us, man, what really happened? What does about 95% of all articles that are coming out on this topic getting wrong?
Yeah, I think, fundamentally, what happens when you have an outage this large, right, that impacts, arguably, Microsoft, I don't think that was the right statement to make. It only affects 1%, of Windows PCs out there, 8.5 million. I'm like, you know what? But those happen to be the really important 8.5 million. and the impact was way larger than that. So I don't think you could get. I don't think that was a smart statement to make. Actually, that's kind of it shows lack of empathy, right? It's like, oh, it's only 1%. I'm like, yeah, but the 1%, I think the early indications right now from people calculating in the insurance industry are talking about a $5 to $8 billion impact on the economy overall, and that cyber insurance is not going to cover the vast majority of it. Cyber insurance,
right.
only get 10 or 20% coverage out of that. So a lot of businesses are out of sorts. A lot of people's lives were upended. Right, a lot of kids couldn't get home because the flights weren't traveling, and unaccompanied minors were stuck. A lot of people wouldn't get the operations that they needed because they were deferred because healthcare was down. And so, on the margin, I mean, people could die, and people probably will die because you don't get the operation in time. You couldn't get an emergency room, right? I mean, these little things have a lot of cascading effects, and I think to basically dismiss and say only 1% of PCs worldwide were impacted, I don't think that's the right statement to make. So it was a significant impact on the economy. So what really happened was essentially, I think, as we all learned, and CrowdStrike has now been quite clear, very specific about exactly what happened, is an hour. There was an hour and a half where they put out a bad, as they call it, channel updates, content update. Essentially, it's not exactly like, but it's very similar to a signature file in antivirus software, right? It's like a content update that says, look, here's some content that helps you detect, breaches and malicious actions on your system.
Right.
Here's the file. And it was pushed out. And for some reason, as they explained, their QA didn't catch it because there was a bug in their QA. And there were two updates that were pushed. And one of them was this one.
Yeah.
And it essentially what happened was it caused the kernel to panic. So the Microsoft operating system was taken down. And unfortunately, when it's taken down and hits that famous blue screen of death that we saw everywhere, literally, the only way at that point to recover, at least a quick workaround, was you had to be physically in front of the machine, boot in the safe mode, delete those offending files, and then reboot again. The problem is, vast majority of the time, IT can't get to those machines easily. The people in front of those machines don't have the expertise to do it. And if you were practicing safe, secure practices, you probably encrypted your hard drive with Microsoft BitLocker. You needed the key, the recovery key. And I know I've heard of some situations where the recovery key was on a PC that had blue screen of death. And so you have this situation where I can't get the recovery keys to recover my PC, to recover the rest of my machine. So I think fundamentally what happened was that 8.5 million PCs were down. And I think a week later, I think they're saying about 97% or so probably are back up a week later, but there's still cascading effects that they're still recovering from. And so that was what it was. I mean, that was all it was for an hour and a half. The PCs that subscribed to the update and updated themselves, 8.5 million of them, put themselves down. And it happens to be airlines, retail, healthcare, education, governments, right? And on and on, right? Critical systems, unfortunately. So
yeah, exactly. And that was very eloquently put. And I think what I want to point out is there were many misconceptions that this was somehow the network outage, and that term outage. It's interesting because it's actually defined by NIST, and it's related to actually cloud-based services. It's more like a client-server type of thing. And I think in a lot of ways, from a semantic perspective, the technical lingo connoted something very different in the general populace, where we typically think of an outage as a service outage. This, in fact, was more of a bricking of endpoints, right? And so it had nothing to do with the cloud, didn't have anything to do with Falcon and, the sort of the monitoring, the cloud managed aspect of the
That's correct. It was a bad update that was pushed to a system that bricked blue screen of death. I think when we say it was an outage, I think the general public is referring to an outage of services, physical services or services. I get it in my services in terms of flights, in terms of retail, in terms of that. In that sense, there was an outage of Starbucks, inability to get my Starbucks, which is true, right? But
don't expect non-technical, like people outside of our pathetic bubble here, tech bubble, to understand that or to be able to work through those abstractions. So if we were to sit there and talk about how technical semantics translated into something very different that even, the business media could not even figure out.
It was confusing. I would agree.
And I think that's one of the big unintended, it's a side effect of what's happened here. And the blue screen of death, it's typically associated with Microsoft Windows.
That's correct.
And there is still, and Microsoft, I agree with you, did some really weird things, like also try to blame regulators in the European Commission and stuff like that, which was
they did.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of weird things going on, which is like, well, it's your fault for forcing us to allow third-party software, to interact with the operating system. If we had only run them in user space instead of the OS space, everything would have been fine. I don't think that's entirely true, right? Again, I think it does point out that a couple of things I would say. Number one, I think operating systems need to be made a lot more robust. There are best practices for making things more robust and isolating these kinds of outage or reverting back to a non-good solution, right? And we know how to do that, not always perfectly reliably, but probably better than what we've done in this case, number one. Number two, vendors, especially vendors that have software running, not in user space, but system space, should be super careful in their QA processes. And what I didn't understand was why there was no. But when you have something like that, normally best practices dictate you do progressive updates, meaning dog food it yourself, then you do, stage rollout, and you watch, you leave a couple of hours and you monitor before you push it out. Well, this one just went to everyone because it was a content update, and obviously it's a security issue. Let's push it out, and I think that was a mistake. The second one was enterprises historically. Remember when you had a new version of OS from Microsoft, you would stage it first, then you would release it, right?
Yeah.
And I think we, on the enterprise side, maybe have gotten too complacent that we let the cloud update critical systems without checking first. And I'm surprised that Fortune 500s don't push back and say, you know what? Before you update anything, I want a stage process, and I want to opt into a late update instead of early update. And my critical systems will be 24, 48, 72 hours behind the main ones. I understand cybersecurity risk. I'm willing to take that risk so that I have uptime, right? So, and I think those options were not available at this time round. Now, I'm pretty sure those options will be available in the near future as we rework this whole software distribution, content update processes. And I think that's a lesson learned for all of us, right? But
it's also important to understand, how we got here with the, and this wasn't a software update like what you were saying. It's more
a content update.
Signature content update, which is different, right? And, given sort of the challenges of scaling out response and keeping things up to date, it does make sense to try to get these things out as quickly as possible, assuming that your whole pipeline and your software has been vetted and you've already built in a level of resiliency and protection with how you've implemented, in this case, like a CI/CD pipeline, right? And then everything along the chain is secure, has the appropriate, release controls as well as Q&A. But here's the thing that I think a lot of people are missing out on. So if you look at the statement, and I think George Kurtz, who's the CrowdStrike founder, did service because he had suggested to Jim Cramer, that there was logic that was pushed out. And so as soon as you do that, you're suggesting that the actual software, the agent, or in this case, the sensor, as they call it, that component or that agent that's running on device was updated when in fact that wasn't the case, right? It was that
the case. There was
it was that content that basically created, and I thought this was really funny. It is actually kind of funny. They said that to the effect that let me see if I can find it here. It's pretty hilarious. What went wrong? Basically, the file basically was not able to elegantly or something like that handle the situation or to some effect like that. I don't know.
Correct.
Who wrote it and came up with this, but it was a funny expression.
I think there were two sets of communications that I think wasn't ideal. One was the Microsoft communication that sort of implied only 1% was impacted. I think that was not very sympathetic. And like, if you were a poor person who was impacted, you would be pretty upset. And it's like, I don't, I think the second one, if you look at CrowdStrike's actual detail, so this is the preliminary report, preliminary findings. I think what they were trying to justify, I mean, there's two parts. One is they tried to explain the timeline, which I think was useful, was nice, was great. But I think the other part too was that they were trying to demonstrate that they were rigorous around the sensor software, that they were rigorous around the templates itself, which, I mean, there's three parts of this.
Templates,
software, the sensor, the templates, and the instantiation of a template. There's three levels. The instantiation itself that would cause a problem. And so what they were trying to show is that we were so rigorous in the first one. We were so rigorous in the second one. This one caught us by surprise. But, I mean, fundamentally, I don't really buy that. I mean, if you know that a push like this can cause behavior change on your software, or can cause a dereferencing a memory location that you don't have access to, fundamentally you should go through the same pipeline process. And yes, you don't have to be maybe as thorough, but progressive updates, dog fooding, and these elements shouldn't be thrown out, or just because it's a content update, so to speak. I think that's the part that I didn't quite buy, but I do understand they're trying to say we've been so rigorous. It's just this point that got us, right? And I'm like, but that point had almost as much risk as the rest of it, and you should treat it appropriately that way. I think that was the part that I was surprised by, actually. Yeah,
and one of the things the thing that let's call it failed was content validator, which I think is part of Looker, Google's Looker CI/CD software. So I did a little bit of research. I had no idea what content validator was, but at least I did my homework and bothered to ask what that was. I could be right, I could be wrong. Who knows? They might be using something else, or they branded their own little, QA or release.
I think they have their own QA process for the content validation, for the content update, the channel files. But it clearly wasn't working. And you would think a simple dog food update to their own internal systems would have surfaced that, given the large number of machines that were impacted. I don't think it was an esoteric machine. Sometimes you see these things where, the machine's too old, or that was on a weird release of Windows that caused it. In this case, I think the large number of machines impacted, 8.5 million in an hour and a half. I think that says to me it was a pretty common case. And if that's the case, a simple progressive update should have surfaced that in within an hour, right? So I think that's the part that I think we all learned the lesson, and hopefully all the other software vendors that watch this say, let's take a lesson away from that, and let's quickly go make sure that we don't have this situation, especially those who have software running in the OS itself, and even in user space, right? You should try to build robust products, right?
Yeah. I mean, definitely maybe a mindset shift. I mean, I posted that this could be a Sarbanes-Oxley moment for cybersecurity, but I think it's important for us to start with the root cause first and work our way out. I mean, I think and then challenge whatever existing practices that we have. I mean, because usually there is a certain reason for it. But then it's also, I think incumbent on everyone to examine the tactical practices. So if it was a point of failure and already what we might consider a robust or a industry standard process for CI/CD and QA, software QA, then we have to look at the tools and the reliance on automation, the reliance on certain types of applications and tools that you use in enabling these development processes, right? I mean, it wasn't software, but even content files or templates, those are still part of software maintenance, right?
That's correct. It still have impact. That's correct.
Yeah, on how software runs. Yeah,
I agree. I think the CI/CD automation software release process need to be looked at, and there are best practices, and I don't think we are following all of those for sure. The other one is digital resilience on the enterprise side of things, right? To understand that when you have a single, I think people have been pushing to say, oh, here's the problem with single vendor and we need diversity and all these things. I think again, I think that's being a little too simplistic. And the other element around multi-vendor is there's added complexity, and that added complexity can also result in vulnerabilities and challenges that we've learned. So it's a balancing. There's no one answer, right? It's a balancing game, and you have to figure out what your resilience strategy is, what your backup strategy is. If your systems go down, what's your pencil and paper backup solution, or what do you go back to? And I think to the extent that you had those in place and your recovery was good, that's great. In fact, if you had ransomware go through your system, you would be in similar situations where you have to recover as well. And so practicing resilience practices, understanding what your digital resilience is, I think those are all equally important. And I think those are, some lessons to take away, right?
Okay.
For sure. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Good recommendations.
So did you show CrowdStrike and Leonard? No.
What?
I said, did you short CrowdStrike? Did you?
Oh, no. I have no comment on any of that stuff. We just talk about the technical end of stuff.
I know. That's too sophisticated for me.
Yeah. Exactly. In more ways than one. Hopefully, like you're suggesting, good comes out of it. I mean, resilience is important, but also just have to put out there that this is not a good thing, right? I mean, we need more defenders. We need more companies like CrowdStrike who can scale out the defenses, because as their CTO recently commented, generative AI is a huge new threat vector for enterprises. And we were talking about earlier, one of the fuels that, and probably the most amazing killer application for crypto is actually ransomware.
Yeah, it's good use case.
Yeah, wonderful use case. Yeah. It's actually the perfect use case. And if you and I are at RSAC 2024, it's like one of the biggest concerns right now. And then you now add generative AI on top that can allow you to create high fidelity, high impact, highly effective social engineering attacks. It's great. And everything else that you can imagine.
Yeah.
The last thing we need is
no spelling errors. Yeah, no spelling errors anymore. Perfect English, right?
Yeah, perfect
English. Yeah, exactly. Your CFO's voice coming through in high fidelity. And I know that there's been situations where they get on a video call, and it's actually good deepfakes, high quality deepfakes, where your CFO is saying, "Send that wire, send that wire." Right.
So seriously, if anyone is wondering where the killer applications are, this is where they are. I mean, look, don't ask anybody in enterprise right now who's trying to figure out how to drive these massive, forecasts of generative AI benefit and productivity. Ask them where they're actually realizing any of that. How about just go and look at the cyber criminal and
they're using it.
Ask them how much are they making using these technologies. So, hey, look,
they've tripled their productivity.
Well, Microsoft says they are the third largest economy in the world. I think that's an underestimation.
They're going to be the second now with Gen AI.
Yeah, and the fastest growing, which may be also an underestimation. So, and that's really pre-generative AI. So anyway, something to think about as we move on to TM Forums, DTW 2024, Ignite. I was not there because I had
You were not there. That's right. You were not there. You were having fun somewhere else, like in New York. We wouldn't mention. But anyway, so
how was it?
It was actually good. So Copenhagen in the summer, right? It's great, right? When it stands up till like 10 p.m., it's wonderful. Weather was great. So it was good. The show was good. Again, autonomy autonomous networks, autonomy in networking has been a goal. TM Forum sort of grasped that, and they were the ones who have been pretty good in articulating the, sort of level 1 to level 5 autonomy, borrowing from, vehicles.
SAE,
Yeah, SAE, exactly. The SAE 5 levels of autonomy, and moving it into networking. And that's taken off. And, there's been a couple of carriers that have committed to, getting to level 4, by 2025. Not sure how all of them are going to do that, but
yeah,
that's the committed goal. And so they're making some progress forward. So I would say that there was a lot of talk around network automation, autonomy, use of AI, traditional AI, and generative AI across the board. Saw a good number of examples of generative AI, but again, a lot of those are all just pilots. I would say probably 80% of the catalysts, which is what the POCs are, where many carriers come together. They had about 50 catalysts, which is good. And what I like about the catalysts is that they bring carriers from all over the world. So Asian carriers
and vendors,
and vendors. So Asian carriers, Asian vendors, Western, vendors coming together, actually collaborating. So I thought that was it's a good place for collaboration. So that was actually nice. I thought that was a good.
Those types of forums are becoming a lot more rare these days, right?
They are. So
international collaboration
is
diminishing quite
dying. Yeah, it is.
It's a dying thing.
I know. It's endangered species right now. This international collaboration thing, right? So I was very happy to see that continue and the conversations, back and forth. So it's a good forum for that. And the other thing that I'm always impressed by is the Asian carriers and Asian vendors actually driving autonomy and AI forward in the big way at scale, right? So that's always very impressive just to see the demos and just to see the state of the art there. They are very committed to doing it. And I would say, like carriers like China Mobile, right? They have the scale, they're pushing it. So when they tell me they'll get to level 4 autonomy in 2025, I almost can believe them because they're actually quite far ahead and very driven to doing it, right? So and I think that's a good thing.
Well, they have like sort of the density and the scale problems. That they don't have a choice. Cost of intelligence actually makes sense. You know what I'm saying? I think that's one of the advantages, because the way I describe Asian markets in a lot of ways, just because of population density and just how everything is packed together, it's almost like a semiconductor scaling, right? I mean, it's like you have the way that your country economy and your demography is structured. It's highly dense, and so there's certain efficiencies that you can yield out of, even though your apartment's probably really small.
No, it feels like it. I think if you're probably in Hong Kong, it feels like you're part of a 2.5D packaging, right? Like, was right.
But you're 3 nanometer versus 16 nanometer. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, in the US, we're like 22 nanometer nodes, right? And in Hong Kong, you're like, I feel like I'm in 3 nanometer, right? So anyway, but I would say it was a good show, and I think we saw things move forward. I'm not quite sure we're progressing at a sufficient rate to meet those goals, but it's always good to have those goals and a lot of demos. But again, I think the only worry I have is a lot of those are still demos, and there aren't very much sort of scaled deployments of Gen AI. But traditional AI there are, and there were some good examples. For sure.
And I see a lot of companies now that have been dabbling with generative AI backing off of that. Some of that we started to get at MWC. Not a lot, because the hype was still pretty outrageous. But a lot of throttling back. In saying, look, you know what? We like to call it AI, but a small part of it is generative AI. It's not, generative AI is everything. There's now this recognition that, well, when we look at the application, right, it actually takes on a much smaller role than probably anybody really anticipated. And there's other foundational things, not foundational models or foundation models, other foundational ML, like traditional stuff that people have been working on to make, enterprise or industrial grade that are now starting to set in But like you said, the progress is still slow because we haven't solved the issues. And I posted a response to a comment that Neil McRae put on Jeff Hollington's post on autonomous XYZ, that we haven't solved the reliability problem, and no one talks about reliability. And you know what? You might think that I'm exaggerating. I go to a lot of conferences. I go to a lot of different industry conferences. Reliability, that word does not show up in a lot of these discussions, especially amongst vendors, about generative AI and its use in industrial applications, whether it's like in a shop, like a factory floor, or in a NOC.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree. I think, traditional AI, so your old CNNs, RNNs that have been around for some time, those generate pretty good output, optimization, things like that, prediction, maintenance. So that works. It's very, very, very narrow. Generative AI itself, I think, one of the challenges is the very nature of generative AI is, we set it so that it can give us some creative outputs, right? Hallucinations are not a weird thing. Hallucinations are part of how they work. I mean, it's fundamentally. And so for human-computer interfaces, where you're using it to talk or trying to suss out intent, I think it's been quite useful, or even summarizing things so that you can understand it for human interaction. I think those are pretty good. When you're trying to do planning or take some sort of operation or making it reasoning, type steps, I don't think we're quite there yet. And you're absolutely right. The reliability isn't quite there, which is why most of these, as long as it's human in the loop, it can be assistive. But if you're trying to make it, the be all and end all, and give it the autonomy, we're definitely not there yet, not with Gen AI. And I haven't seen any scale production deployment of Gen AI. Most of these are all assistive, and that's great. I mean, I think that's...
I mean, where I'm seeing some of the, and by the way, I'm a huge fan of the Catalyst. They're just really freaking awesome. So if you don't follow like what TM Forum does with the Catalyst, I mean, they're just phenomenal. Great collaborations. And, the one thing that I miss is when I'm there, I can talk to the folks who are part of the teams that are working at Catalyst. I can go deep, and, they don't know who the hell I am. So they just tell me.
Everyone knows who you are.
Yeah, which is awesome, right? Because I don't want people going, oh my God.
They all know who you are.
Leonard guy always is such a Debbie Downer. We don't want to talk to him because he's going to just talk a bunch of crap. But no, hey, look, my whole thing has always been about let's talk about the technology where it's at, not the hype where it's typically very disconnected, and it doesn't produce anything other than maybe some residual benefits that never support the hype thesis. But yeah, great stuff, and AI will continue to be difficult.
It will.
But that's okay, because you're going to have some very smart people who do a lot of tough work to make it to have it find a home. But a lot of the closed loop stuff really tough, especially in a learning system. So I don't know how even these Chinese operators are going to get to. Yeah,
we'll see improvements. I'm hopeful. I think we'll see more. We're seeing a lot of models move towards sort of function calling for automation, for reasoning, for planning. So I think that part will improve with a lot more tens of billions behind it and time. I think we'll get to improve reliability, and with a bit of guardrails, maybe you can have it do functions that are mostly safe. So I think the AI component of DTW was good. I mean, healthy. Of course, the other topic that was there was the whole API, right? I mean, that was the other thing. There was the other theme at DTW, right? API. So in fact, not only at DTW, it was there at MWC. It's been there for a while, right?
Yeah.
API.
Yeah. And I recently had a chat, actually, when I was in Silverstone on the F1 track in the paddock. I had a chat about that with an industry analyst buddy of mine. And TM Forum, actually, the open APIs are a huge. They're a huge foundation for, Project Camara, right?
There's collaboration across, Camara,
especially on the quote unquote monetization of things, right?
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, so what were your key takes there? What came out?
I
Interesting.
think I think
And then we'll talk
API.
about, yeah. Go ahead.
Also, I would say, so TM Forum has been around APIs for some time already, right? So
Oh,
this,
yeah.
the whole, sort of ODA canvas. I mean, they've always been strong on the IT side of that's what they've been pushing, right? The IT side of the carriers
Yeah.
has been sort of TM Forum's thing, right? Your OSS, BSS systems. That's a lot of the discussions around that. So that part has always been there, and I think the APIfication of network services, I think that's sort of the next level. And you're right. I mean, the telcos talk about monetization of API, which is that's a bad term or description. It's actually monetization of services that people want and people care about through the API as a mechanism should be what it really is. It's kind of like going around, and I sort of joke about it. It's like going around and say, hey, Leonard, have you heard of the HTTP economy, right?
Yeah.
It's $2 trillion HTTP economy. That's not really helpful, right? I mean, it's services, right?
It's and that's, I mean, this is something I've been saying for years. Actually, believe it or not, people who follow me know, I've been saying, stop calling it API. There's no such thing as an API economy. Yeah. And the way I know that somebody knows what they're talking about is when they don't call it an API economy. When they call it API, and I had trouble with this when I was at Gartner too, because I told them, dude, do you guys even know what an API is? Right? There's no such thing as an economy that you can build off of an API. Right. It's always the underlying service.
That's correct.
And how can you not understand, and a lot of people don't, what an interface is, or a collection of standard interfaces. I mean, so if you've been doing systems integration, even basic integration stuff, from ages ago, what an API is, where it fits within, what its purpose is within software and then outside of software or an application. And, I think that's one of the things that the industry has struggled with. And going back to like this whole issue that we've had with the representation or the portrayal of the CrowdStrike incident or outage in the media, we have the same problem here with the API, where it's fostered misconceptions about what's really going on and what has to happen and why it's important in the context of the telco stack, right? The business stack, right? And then if you can't get that right, you can't really have a conversation about monetization, because you're talking about monetizing something that you can't monetize.
I agree. And I've talked to telco execs that talk about the API economy, and we're going to monetize the APIs. I'm like, so what services behind that? Well, the API economy, API. I'm like, that doesn't tell me anything.
I have no idea what you're talking about, dude.
That's right, exactly, right. So yeah, you're right. I mean, again, sometimes it's frustrating, and you are right that a lot of people are looking for the convenient catchphrase. So and then they hand wave everything, but the hand waving is not helpful because it doesn't move things forward, because you're not actually talking about the right object at the right level of abstraction. But there is progress. I would say the Chimera APIs are making progress. A lot of those are very, very rudimentary. So I've actually signed up on a couple of developer portals across the telcos myself, just to see what's there. A lot of those are very early, right? It's like SIM swap or identity verification APIs, and those are the sort of the simple ones. And I think we need to sort of say that's good. That's a very simple first step. It's good that you got in there, but be very, very clear that the value you can charge for that is very limited, because the banks and the financial institutions have different ways of doing that already. Or look around it, right?
And here's the big problem. This whole thing should not be about functional services or features, right? It should be about non-functional. So if you're a architect, or at least IBM certified architect, you would know what I'm talking about, but which I am, but used to be. But here's the thing. Non-functional means it is about the network itself, the infrastructure, and how its capabilities are expressed.
That's correct.
Upward.
That's correct.
Right?
That's correct. That's
Yeah,
correct.
security is, I'm sorry, is not part of
It's
that.
just like, can you tell me your name? Well, it's Leonard. Okay, that was a simple lookup. What's the value add there? It's very limited. And the hard ones aren't quite here yet, but they're coming. So the one that has been in the process of standardization is quality on demand, right? So the QoD, which is like, give me a network slice with a certain kind of characteristics, performance-wise, certain kind of QoS, SLAs, and that's coming. And I'm seeing some early examples, like, so DT has it, and Orange has some of that calls, highly limited, highly constrained, just starting out. So I think we need to be very careful when we talk about this telco API, how big it is. If your McKinsey is between 200, 300 billion, if your IDC, it's somewhere in the 6-7 billion range, and if your ABI research is even smaller, which is, again, that's all kind of irrelevant because
going back to one of the biggest audiences or folks who've gotten API confused are actually the analysts and the consultancies that don't have technical background. And so when you read these reports and they talk about API, as soon as the first API plus economy, stop reading the article, because you have already you've already vetted that the people who authored this thing don't know what they're talking about. And so just avoid it, because these numbers never materialize anyways.
No, they don't.
But no, I'm glad you're saying that, what you're saying, because with DT, but then and you don't need open APIs, you don't need Kamar for any of this stuff. That's the problem.
You could have done that before.
The problem.
You don't need Kamara.
Leave it at that.
Standardize it. The difficulty I see is that we didn't have to have, like, if you look on the web, which is the equivalent, which is where a lot of the APIs grew up. They grew up because it was a need to create those APIs, because there was a real business and a real need, and the developer ecosystem that says, I want those APIs. I want to monetize that because there's a service behind it I care about. And on our side, on the telco side, I think we're still in the early stages and we're looking for something. And the difficulty I have is that I don't know how you take those huge numbers that the executives talk about, and the reality, which is that we have a very, very rudimentary API ecosystem. I'm sorry, it's very rudimentary. I'm looking at it and I compare it versus the cloud stuff, which, I've taken a look at, and we actually code to some of those cloud APIs. And I look at the telco stuff, I'm like, this is super it's really rudimentary, right? Really basic. Even with the CS guys helping out, is super rudimentary. And I'm like, they're like, oh, Roy, you got SIM-swap. I'm like, you know what? Twilio had those APIs many, many years ago. SIM-swap, Twilio had. Okay, maybe not all the carriers, maybe only subset. It was back in 2020. I'm like, come on, right? You're telling me stuff that's old, right? So I would say, I think it's important, well, Roy, we need to crawl, walk, run. I agree, right? I agree that the telcos probably should find services on the networks, expose them. But at the same time, if the cloud side of the world are sprinting marathons, which is where they sort of are, you can't tell me you're crawling and walking when the rest of the world.
I don't think that's fair, because one of the things I was going to say is what happened to this whole TechCo thing. I did kind of get a sense from DTW that that's dying off a little bit, which is a good thing, because I think it's not fair to put the weight of these CSPs and their business model and what they do on an operator. I think it's very unfair. And also the dynamic is very different, because why do these CSPs have well-defined APIs? Is because they have very well-defined services and value propositions where integration either within or outside of their little walled garden is important, right? So if we're in supporting developers and what have you. So, so you're making an excellent point. It's demand driven. It's not, hey,
let's make it up.
Try to address an imaginary problem or a problem that hasn't materialized yet. And I think that's going to be a big problem. And I see it as a big problem. and it's going, and this whole conversation around 5G monetization attached to this thing is, I think, is very, very flimsy. It has very
well, I mean,
attachment and support.
You're looking for excuses or reasons why those tens of billions that you've spent on CapEx to upgrade to a 5G network, when the customers weren't really demanding it, and it was basically sort of a race to nowhere, right? To out 5G your competition, and then realize that after you've made those justifications of tens of billions of dollars in CapEx, that you didn't actually know how to monetize it, right? That's a problem. So then you come up with story after story to try to justify that. And there are real elements embedded in there, I think, but I think to your point is that there's some reality there, and it's hard to be a carrier. I recognize that. And you have regulatory compliance, you have a lot of, it's high fixed costs. All those elements is really, really hard, and it's competitive in some sense. So that's all hard. But I think we need to importantly, I think it's very important to have a conversation that's real, that's not a hand wavy, that's not a pretend, and to say, here's a situation, here's where things really are. Here's what I know, here's what I don't know, and here's what we're going to go and validate. And this is how we go about doing it. I think that's really important, having that level of conversation and having candid conversations. I think that's
and more sensible ones, because like our friends at AWS always and Amazon always tell us, is like meet the customer where they are. Or I don't know if they invented that or whatever. Maybe they're the customers.
I think maybe they just do it better than they do it.
Well, right? I mean, it's like, how detached are you from the customer situation? And then if you're so detached, value generation and extraction is going to be very, very tough. Because you're just not dealing with ground truths and reality. And it's more, it goes beyond, I mean, that's what honest conversation needs to be about. And I think one of my frustrations coming out of MWC, and it was in my report that I put out, is like this industry continues to dilute itself, right? And it's not healthy. So stop it. But they're not stopping it. They continue.
It's hard, right? I think I understand it's hard, because you have to show the board and you have to show investors something. You have to find a shiny new object to distract, because running that business is a really hard thing, and it's really, really hard. But there are carriers that are succeeding. There are carriers that are growing, and there are efficient carriers around the world who are actually pretty good examples. And so,
no doubt. But to attribute it to any kind of technology or enablement is becoming tougher and tougher, because there's a thing called execution.
That's right.
Great execution, great strategy. It has nothing to do with technology. That is also a factor, and maybe some of that is not getting distracted by techno hype and all these other narratives that distract a company from focusing on the markets that it should be focusing on in the way that allows it to capitalize on its competitive advantages, right? I think there's, and it's interesting that you say that they get a lot of pressure from the board. Yeah, and that's what we heard at RSAC 2024, is a lot of these cybersecurity practitioners getting pressure from the board. And, hey, we need to do something with generative AI. And their biggest angst was not being able to push back.
Yeah, that's right. And saying, look, not a fit too early. Exactly.
And then not having anyone listening to them, as they've been screwing around with this stuff already for a long time, having vendors push this stuff on them, and then not having the ability to push back. But how sustainable is that? And then where's the value?
It's not. And I think, boards that are competent, boards that are more seasoned, I think boards that are not reactive and not slaves to FOMO. I think those are the ones long-term that will extract value, see value, and be more reasonable. And there are those organizations out there, right? Those are the interesting ones, actually.
Yeah. So they can pat themselves on the back if they can.
They should.
They should do a self-assessment to see if they fall in that category, even though I don't believe in self-assessment.
They should, you know what?
But they can go ahead and do that and then pat yourself on the back.
Like most analyst firms, the big ones, we should put like a 50 question, a self-assessment, and charge them $10,000 each time for downloading it.
Yes. Yeah. Call me if you need one.
Yeah, I will.
Okay. So let's move on to the last topic, which is Nokia acquisition of Infinera. This is really interesting. You know, it was announced on the 27th of June. You know, they're acquiring it according to Pekka to scale their optical networks and business and accelerate product roadmap. But they also made you know, a pretty big claim that they're going to be able to grow their business or see a lot of growth through data center, which I thought was a really interesting comment. But what's your take on Infinera? Because, you know, a lot of our friends opined about it. Actually, I think you and I might have been quoted. Didn't we get quoted on an article about this?
Maybe we did. I don't remember.
Yeah, on Fierce Network.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
Somewhere. I mean, Infinera does have, I mean, they do have good products. They've been around for some time.
Yeah.
I think the valuation was probably pretty fair given the technologies. And I think, you know, optics, you know, sort of converged optics and optics, certainly important. I think part of it was the thought that maybe with AI, with the need for higher bandwidth and throughput, sort of lower cost operations, less energy, that Nokia felt that they were able to monetize that, you know, with Infinera technologies. And so I think it is possible. I would say, you know, probably I'm cautiously optimistic. It comes down to how Nokia takes to the market. Again, I'm not sure yet that they can do that, but I do know that as far as I can tell, within intra data centers and inter data centers, that I think that's important. And you know, what we do see is a growth in traffic, and so to the extent that you can do it, sure, I think, you know, there is definitely value on that side. So again, it comes down to traffic growth is there. Optical is important in both inter and intra data center. Infinera has had good technology. You know, they are one of the leaders technology wise in this area, and combination with Nokia could be good. Could be. I you know, cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting bet. I guess it's a gamble because we don't know how this is all going to turn out. And also, you know, I don't know if you're part of that, you know, Colin Bannon, CTO of BT, he put out a question a while back about, hey, you know, how is AI,
Gen AI affecting traffic? Yeah. I mean, what we see in talking to some of our carrier friends is that the last mile traffic has not been impacted significantly, right? Again, because a lot of the workloads in terms, at least with the LLM so far, it's text-based, not been a huge amount of traffic. It is small. And even with the video creation and all that, I mean, how many cat videos are you going to be able to create to watch, right? For fun on your own, right? That's limited. Yeah. So the impact for Gen AI so far on last mile traffic has been somewhat limited. You know, XR, AR, VR would have driven a lot more traffic compared to Gen AI. Now, on the first mile and the middle mile, where you're moving workloads around for training or models or training data, yeah, there is certainly an uptick in that. And within the data center, in the hyperscalers, right, and in places where they're doing the training, sure, for sure. But again, that's a small part of the market, right? I mean, that's a small part of the market. That's very limited, unless everyone believes that it should be training frontier models, which they really shouldn't be. I think, you know, that the traffic growth is going to be, I mean, it's a constraint to that part of the market, right? Yeah,
and then, you know, I think it's also a pretty crowded market at the moment, and so and that's what's really curious for me. It's you know, some of the assumptions that were stated about web scale and AI, and also the role of optical. How big is it? I mean, I think if the thesis here is that, you know, a lot of these large AI supercomputing environments are going to go optical, you should
Maybe. Maybe. I think Meta and NVIDIA has shown in some cases that optical is not always the case, the way to go. That copper can be a more, active copper cables may be a more cost-efficient solution to that. So I'm seeing some of that. So I don't know which way it's going to pan out yet, right?
Yeah,
but certainly Nokia is making a bet that inter and intra data center traffic is going to grow tremendously.
right.
Right.
Yeah. So all I'm saying is this: is if you see a report that shows somehow traffic going exponential, and AI ridiculous.
That
remember this little bit right here, because and then ask a lot of good questions, hard ones, because I don't think some of those forecasts that I've seen are even begin to do basic homework around this stuff. So but anyways, thanks to Colin for raising a really cool question.
That's an important question. We'll see where it pans out, but we'll see where AI takes us.
I mean, definitely. I mean, for the other stuff that they're doing in the telco, especially with BEAD coming up. I mean, I was at Mountain Connect last year. Nokia was one of the only big, mobile players there. I thought they were going to, be having their whole FWA team there. It was like, no, it was their optical team. So anyway, so that in that regard, probably a pretty cool potential bet, provided that this BEAD stuff actually, pans
the BEAD
out.
stuff. I think that makes sense. And we'll see where Infinera and Nokia go combined on the data center side, and inter data center will remain to be seen. We'll see.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, we can't let AT&T and Snowflake off the hook.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
So
And
I'll just say what needs to be said here. It was serious. And the only reason why we don't remember it is because of CrowdStrike. But it's just as, I would say it's just as serious, because the frequency of these data breaches, I mean, we've seen it with T-Mobile and so many others.
Yeah, T-Mobile's been breached 7-8 times.
Yeah. I mean, it's like,
let's and
don't let T-Mobile get away with it either.
No.
Saying that we're more secure. No,
my information's been breached at T-Mobile a couple of times. I mean, and then now my AT&T information's been breached too, right? Because as an analyst, I'm subscribed to basically all the major carriers, and I'm like, you keep breaching me, right? I'm like, okay, well,
the dangers that we live with as industry analysts, right? It's terrible.
I know. We should. I mean, how many carriers do we subscribe to? Quite a few. Right, even MVNOs, because I sign up to test the stuff out, and then I get breached, and again, right? But you know what? After you've been breached 2-3 times, what's another 7 times? Come on, right?
Oh, geez. I know they're just only taking the same information. Right?
Exactly. Except with the AT&T one, I think it's got
their data sets. So
it's got a text. It's got a text metadata. It's got a call metadata. So the AT&T one gave them extra information to work with. So I think they're probably appreciative of that breach.
We're good. All right. Hey, it's great catching up, Roy. This is probably like the longest episode ever, but it's all stuff, important stuff. And I think we got a lot off our chest. But hey, everybody.
Better now.
Yeah, thanks for joining us and, slogging through our rant here. We really appreciate your viewership and listenership. And so make sure to contact Roy Chua at www.avidthink.com. This dude knows a lot of stuff, very experienced. He's one of the many, or let's call it, I won't say many, let's call it the select analysts that I really respect and think does a great job. That's why he's on my podcast. And hit him up on LinkedIn and check out just a ton of stuff that he does across the industries, including cybersecurity. Some people might not know he does cybersecurity, but he does, and he's very well.
Pretty sad. That's where I got started, actually, networking and security. pretty sad, but yeah, that's where I got started. But appreciate it, Leonard. Always good to be on your show. Honored to be invited, and all the answers came from perplexity. So I'm glad it worked out, and you appreciated those answers.
Yeah. Thanks for
Very
blowing
good.
your cover. Okay. Yeah. And so, hey, everyone, please subscribe to our podcast, which will be featured on the Next Curve YouTube channel, which you're probably watching us on right now. So just hit that subscribe button, comment, let us know if there are any other topics you'd like for us to talk about in the future. Check out the audio version on Buzzsprout, or find us on your favorite podcast platform. We're like everywhere. And also subscribe to the Next Curve research portal at www.next-curve.com for the tech and industry insights that matter. And we'll see you next time.